A number of people have said to me in the foyer that the first three speakers were worth the entire day right there, and absolutely excellent information, great presentations, and we're really thankful for those presentations. And there's a lot more to come today. The next speaker is Gil Scott. Gil is the founder-president of Gil Scott Sports Management, and his topic is 30 years inside the NFL, CFL, and NHL, lessons on life and work from a sports entrepreneur. One thing I love doing at these conferences is having leaders in not only the academic world, but also leading practitioners, so we get different perspectives on having an active, dynamic faith in the marketplace. Gil founded Gil Scott Sports Management in 1979 and currently represents a wide range of clients. More than 65 active NFL and CFL football players, NHL, NCAA, CFL, and CIS coaches and management, and sports media personalities. He has negotiated over 500 professional sports contracts, including contracts for first-round selections in both the NFL and CFL, GMs and coaches in the NHL, and the richest contract for a kicker in the history of the NFL. Gil is a graduate of Michigan State University and has a wealth of entrepreneurial knowledge and experience in the business of sports. Gil was the first Canadian contract advisor to be certified by the NFLPA. Gil served as a sports consultant for the Royal Bank's Sports Professional Program from 1997 through 2009. A man of strong faith, Gil is also chairman of Equip Canada, which is a ministry connected with John Maxwell. On this project, Gil works side by side with John Maxwell, the author and speaker. Their organization has already trained over 2 million Christian leaders worldwide. I think it's actually up to 5 million. They've trained 5 million leaders. They'll have a display table tonight in the Grand Ballroom. Gil will speak about how he built his business, the role his faith has played, and how he strives to make a difference every day. Gil's presentation will draw on anecdotes from having dealt with hundreds of top athletes, coaches, and professional sports teams throughout North America. Gil?
Well, thank you very much, Rick. It's a great privilege to be here today and to have this opportunity to speak to this entrepreneurial group. Now, you notice what Rick just said when he was introducing me. He said, you've already heard 3 great speakers and you've already got your money's worth. So don't worry about this one. You've got your money's worth. Thanks for that introduction, Rick. And again, thanks for having me here today. You know, I was reading the brochure and it says the vision of ELO is to be the world's leading organization to equip, connect, and inspire Christian entrepreneurial leaders. What a great idea and mandate you have to bring all of us here together today, Rick. People ask me, so you're a sports agent, so does that mean you're like Jerry Maguire? I had 3 people come up to me last night and say, are you like Jerry Maguire at the reception? So yes, I'm sure you've all seen the movie Jerry Maguire, and that is a good portrait of what a sports agent does. Now, I could stand up here today and tell you that I've been to 17 Super Bowls, Stanley Cup final games, numerous Grey Cup games, or that I stood on the extra playoff hole watching Mike Weir sink a punt to win the Masters in Augusta. And people might look at me from afar and think that I've got this glamorous job and that I'm living the dream. But it's not a dream, it's real life and it's hard work. And because sports is so attractive to so many people, I'm constantly asked by people, how do I become a sports agent? Well, I have a pat answer that I give everybody. I always tell people you have to represent a player who can actually play, win his confidence to have him represent you. So I say, go find a player. I'll split the deal with you. And I've said that to people for over 30 years, and I've only ever had 2 guys come back and actually do that. One is Scott Mitchell, who worked with me for 3 years, and then we got him the gig as president of the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and he's been doing that for a number of years. And Tim Fleiser, a former player I represented, who's currently working with me. How do we get players? People would often ask, and I say the best way is through referrals. You might recognize the gentleman with the white hair and the big glasses. That's one of my clients by the name of John Muckler, and that's number 99 beside him there. You may remember him from professional hockey fame. You know, John Muckler is a great client who won 5 Stanley Cups with the Edmonton Oilers. Now, we've been to a few Super Bowls together, and my friend Roger, who usually travels with me to some of those games, is a guy that likes to ask questions. So he always wanted to ask John, you were Executive of the Year in Buffalo, and you got fired. You took Ottawa Senators to the Stanley Cup final and got fired. Tell me, how do they do it? How do they fire you? And John says, well, it usually takes about 3 minutes, and they send a flunky in to do it. John coached Wayne Gretzky, as we all know, and Mark Messier in Edmonton. John, I was speaking to him last week. He said, Gretz was the greatest finesse player the game ever knew, and Messier was a baby bull. He said, what set them apart, and this goes for anything in life, was their passion for the game. He said, if you think of players as being successful, John says it's because of their passion for the game. They were dedicated to be the best. They understood the team concept, and it was their will to win and their sheer determination that was the difference. He said there was great trust amongst themselves as teammates, and all they ever talked about was winning, not money, not how much the next contract was going to be. All they talked about was winning. John said they were a special group. Some teams, he said, would try to win. Those guys love to win. Now, seeing I'm in Vancouver today, there might be some number of you here that are from the Vancouver area and are probably, could I suggest, Canuck fans? Is that possible? Any Canuck fans here? Okay, well, I also represent a former assistant general manager to John Muckler in Ottawa by the name of Peter Chiarelli, who is the general manager of the Boston Bruins and who put together that big bad Bruin team that came in here in Game 7 and skated home with the Stanley Cup, I'm sorry to say, for you Vancouver natives. Now, let me tell you how that happened. You're probably wondering, how did that happen? Game 7, home game. How in the world did they lose to the Boston Bruins in Game 7? It's a very simple answer. You've got 2 great Swedish players, the Sedins. You've got that American kid that's a pretty big center, Ryan Kessler. But guess what? One thing Peter Chiarelli knew, the team with the most Canadians is going to win the Stanley Cup. Canadian kids grow up playing road hockey, thinking about winning the Stanley Cup. And if you take the rosters of the 2 teams and count up the number of Canadians, Boston had more Canadians. So I hope you didn't lose any money betting on that game. Not that we should bet as Christians. Well, after I graduated from Michigan State University, I moved back to Toronto and started in the life insurance business. That's how I got my start. And life insurance salesmen are always going to conferences and conventions. So early in my career, I had the opportunity to hear the great famous sales trainer by the name of J. Douglas Edwards, who I think was in his 70s or 80s when I heard him speak at the Sheraton Center in front of 2,000 people. And one of the things the brochure said was I was supposed to give you some tips. So here's one of my tips. Life insurance is an intangible product, and it's not like selling a car or a home that, people can reach out and touch. So J. Douglas Edwards that day taught us one great thing, and if you're in sales, here's my tip for you. Little did I know how powerful this particular tip would be, not only in selling insurance in those days, but in negotiating contracts. So let me tell you what he said. He said, when you ask a closing question, shut up. Let me say that again. When you ask a closing question, shut up. The first guy who talks loses. Now, what salesmen typically do is they overtalk the sale. So I had an opportunity to put this into practice in a negotiating situation that was rather unique. I represented a quarterback out of Winnipeg by the name of Dieter Brock, who I ultimately took to the Los Angeles Rams. And Dieter was holding out in Winnipeg, you may remember, and got traded to the Hamilton Tiger Cats about 1983-84. So while the trade was going down, I was at Maple Leaf Gardens in Harold Ballard's apartment with King Clancy and Harold, and Winnipeg was delaying the trade. They'd agreed to it, then they reneged on it. So it's now about midnight. All the press are camped out down at Maple Leaf Gardens, hiding, waiting for some news of this event. And Harold said to King and I, he said, let's go down to the hot stove lounge and get some ice cream and butterscotch sauce. So we went down there and got some ice cream and butterscotch sauce. Now, Harold was a diabetic, but he used to love to get his ice cream and butterscotch sauce. So eventually at 2 in the morning, I left, and the deal was complete. But I had to go to Hamilton the next morning to negotiate the contract with Joe Zuger, their general manager. Now, what you need to know about Joe is he was a great player, was their general manager of their football team at the time, but Joe doesn't speak. Joe hardly ever puts 2 sentences together as far as a conversation goes. So when you try to negotiate with a guy and you ask a closing question and you shut up, with Joe Zuger, there was dead silence. Now, Joe fancies himself as a bit of an artist, so he had a little pad of paper and a pen, and I asked my closing question. I said something to the effect, and I can't remember what the number was, but I said, Joe, why don't we do this deal for $300,000? And I shut up. And the silence started. And I kept telling myself, the first guy that talks loses. I wanted to say, Dieter can do this, Dieter can do that, The first guy that talks loses. I kept telling myself that. And J. Douglas Edwards had said, 15 seconds of real-time silence will seem like 5 minutes. Well, with Joe Zuger, we had 15 or 20 minutes of actual time silence. And I just kept saying to myself, first guy that talks loses, first guy that talks loses. So the end result was about 20 minutes of dead silence as he's doodling away on a pad of paper. He finally kind of grunts and groans, okay, I guess we can do that. And I'm like, yes, it worked. So that's my tip for you for today. It's true. It's been a fun ride with many rare privileges working in the professional sports. But today I want to talk to you about 3 tips that I can pass on to you. Things I've learned over the years throughout my career that I believe have led or contributed to the measure of success that the Lord has blessed me with. And using the word TIP as an acronym, I would suggest that T is for trusting in the Lord. That's my first point. My theme verse for this talk is Proverbs 16:9. In his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. As I think about my career, I never set out to be a sports agent. My father was a famous pastor in Toronto. He had the largest Baptist church in Canada in the 50s and 60s. He was a great speaker. He was a wonderful father. I miss him every day. He preached from the pulpit the truth, and he lived it at home. I never saw one shadow or one moment of inconsistency in his walk with the Lord, in the home or in the pulpit. He was well loved, had lots of chances to speak all over the world, and had radio and television programs starting in 1949 in Toronto. He became president of Youth for Christ in Toronto in 1949, succeeding Chuck Templeton. Billy Graham was president of Youth for Christ in the USA at the same time. They became great friends. And when Billy Graham came to Toronto for the crusade in 1955, my dad had to meet him at the train. He traveled by train in those days. Met him at the train station in Union Station, and I was 5 years old. Reporters picked me up, took my picture with Billy Graham, which I still have in my home to this day. So there was a lot of pressure on me as a young guy that I should go into the ministry. I should be a pastor. I should be a preacher, because my dad was. And I always thought, you really should serve the Lord in life, and the best way to do it is to be a pastor or preacher like my dad. But I thought, man, I could never be as good as him. How could I ever live up to be Dr. Jack Scott? Not a chance, not me. So when I was at Michigan State University, while I was taking undergraduate degree in radio and television, I had this gnawing in my heart that I had to somehow or other be a pastor, and after Michigan State I was going to have to go to seminary. Well, a group of Baptist churches that we belonged to had a seminary in Sioux Falls, North Dakota, and one American Thanksgiving weekend they had a special weekend in Sioux Falls for people considering going to seminary. So 2 guys from our church and myself drove out to South Dakota, and we went to this weekend. And I couldn't believe the theme of the weekend. The theme of the weekend was, you can serve the Lord no matter what you do. You can do it in business, you can do it. And I thought, man, these guys are trying to recruit students, and they're telling me I don't have to be a pastor? This is kind of interesting. So I come back home, and I remember to this day going in my parents' bedroom, sitting on the bed with my dad, And I said, Dad, you aren't going to believe what this weekend was about. They told me I could serve the Lord no matter what I did. I don't have to be a pastor. And he said, no, Gilbert. He said, you don't. He said, let me tell you the story of what happened this weekend while you were away. He said, I had to take the funeral of a man who for 25 years came and prayed with me every Sunday morning before I went out to preach. He said he was the vice president of General Electric in Canada. And he said that man served the Lord as a Christian businessman more than anybody I ever knew, or any preacher or any pastor. So that kind of gave me a release to feel that, okay, I don't have to be a pastor. Maybe I can get involved in business. So when I moved back to Toronto after graduating from Michigan State, got involved in the life insurance business, and then from there started doing some financial planning, got involved with Athletes in Action. They had a week in Toronto where I met a number of athletes, sold an income averaging annuity product that was a tax deferral scheme for professional athletes. And one thing led to another, and one guy just asked me one day, he said, how would you like to negotiate my contract? So Gil Scott did not have this dream to become a sports agent. That was the Lord's plan. So I negotiated his contract. Then he referred me to a couple of other guys, and so on and so forth. And my insurance income was up here, and I had this little sports income down here, and the Lord just kind of made it go like that. So that's why I'm standing before you today. I never had any idea, about being a sports agent. If you'd asked me 30 years ago, if I'd be sitting in Jerry Jones's office with the Dallas Cowboys negotiating a contract, I never would have believed it. The Lord certainly has directed my steps. Analytical people would say, you need to make X number of new contracts this year to make X dollars. But I never have done that. I just kind of lean and rely on the Lord and what he brings my way. I trust that the Lord will look after my family and me just like he always has. Now, have there been some ups and downs over the years? Of course there has. Good times, bad times. But God has always been good. One of the really tough times was living in Canada. I represented some players in the United States, NFL players, and I was looking for a financial advisor who could handle their investments south of the border. Well, I got referred to this great Christian financial advisor who went to a very prominent church that if I said the name of it, you would know it in the U.S., and basically he stole money from my players. So this kind of hurt my credibility for a while with some of those guys, even though I, in fact, had nothing to do with that other than refer them to this so-called Christian financial advisor. So that hurt my reputation. But the Lord had another plan. A couple of years later, Royal Bank of Canada approached me and said, we're looking to get athletes as clients. Could you help us? You know how athletes work. You know how agents work. And I said, this is perfect. I don't want to be responsible for my players' finances. I just want to negotiate their contracts. I don't want to have another situation where guys are getting ripped off or hosed or whatever you want to call it. I said, you're never going to read in the newspaper that Royal Bank has ripped off 25 athletes. It's not going to happen. If they did, they'd make it up to them. So for 9 years, I set up a whole sports professionals program, private banking, mortgages, investments with the Royal Bank. And that's been a great experience to have that opportunity to do that. And it was kind of like the Lord was saying, Gil, you had that bad experience in the 90s. I'm going to make it up to you here in the 2000s. So walk with the Lord. Follow the opportunities he puts in front of you. And again, our theme verse, Proverbs 16:9, in his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. So we're talking about trusting in the Lord. Now I want to talk to you about integrity in business. Do not compromise your principles in business. You do not have to compromise your Christian walk to be successful in business. You have to be confident in who you are as a Christian. Romans 12:2 says, you can be in the world, but not of the world. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. People ask me, how do you hang out with all these athletes? Like, as a Christian, is that hard to do? And I say, no, I go out with them, buy them dinner. I drink a Diet Coke or an orange juice, and it's all good. You don't have to live this lifestyle some of them live. Another comment I'll make to you is that owners of some of these professional sports teams are really some great character people. And on the flip side, some of them are some of the meanest, nastiest, loneliest alcoholics I've ever met. You do not want to emulate their lifestyle. Now, loyalty is an interesting word, and it's a change that I've noticed after 30 years in this business. This is a new generation. There is a lot less loyalty in business than there used to be, especially in the sports business. Loyalty is not what it once was. I pride myself in always being loyal to my people, going the extra mile, and doing the right thing. But loyalty stems from being passionate about what you're doing. If you don't love what you're doing, you're not going to stick with it. And for my little tip here for you, P is priorities in life, external, in other words, outside of work. Now, I want to talk to you about 3 areas of my life that are priorities: family, finances, and faith. Some people might tend to compartmentalize their life and say that these things are outside of your career. But I believe that these areas must be given priority, and you must have balance in your life, otherwise your business will not succeed. Just as I was raised in a pastor's home going to church every Sunday, I made it a priority to be at church with my family every weekend that I could. I still surround myself on my iPod on airplanes with music, great preachers that I love to listen to. And I would say, don't be so wrapped up in your business that you don't have time for being with your family. If you're a successful businessman, be a successful family man. That's more important. My son Bill just turned 32 last week. He is the general manager of the Edmonton Oilers farm team in the American Hockey League, the Oklahoma City Barons. He has the privilege, as we speak today, of having Taylor Hall, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Justin Schultz, all on his team, and they're playing in Abbotsford tomorrow night, so I get to go see him. But when he was growing up and playing hockey, I knew I wouldn't have him forever. His last 2 years, I recruited less players, made less income, because my priority was to be at his games. His schedule drove my travel schedule, and that was far more important to me than any monetary gain. And speaking of the NHL lockout, not that anybody was, but there is an NHL lockout going on right now. I had to talk to my general manager's son the other day, and I was kind of going on about my thoughts about Mr. Bettman and his 3rd lockout in 10 years or whatever it is. And, of course, my son Bill now considers himself management. So I was complaining to him about the lockout, and he says to me, "You agents are all alike." What have I raised here, I thought. You know, even as I look at my calendar this fall, I've taken some personal weekends, and I'm wondering if my business is going to suffer. But it's been a season of putting family first. Representing people in the CFL, NFL, and the NHL, my schedule is really heavy from September until the end of June. July and August, I try and kick back at the cottage. I not only put priority on my own family, but also I value my families of my players. Let me tell you the John Ryan story. I represent John Ryan. He's the Regina-born punter for the Seattle Seahawks just south of here. But his first couple of years in the NFL, he was with the Green Bay Packers. And he had told me one night that he really wished his father could get to one of his games in Green Bay. His father lived in Regina, was dying with cancer. Couldn't travel due to the ability of his leg having to be straight out and all this kind of stuff. So I said, well, what about a private plane or private jet? You know, maybe you get him to a game that way sometime. And the conversation kind of ended. And that was kind of that. So I was at a John Maxwell event in Pebble Beach and was coming back to the San Francisco airport about 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. And my phone rang, and it was John Ryan's mother. And she said, "Gil, remember you said something about a private plane? Well, the Packers just told John that they would give him a suite this weekend if Bob could get to the game, and they could wheel him in a wheelchair up to the suite, and he could get to see John play. Wouldn't that be wonderful?" And I said, yeah, that would be unbelievable. But I'm about to get on a plane for 4 hours, and I'm thinking in my mind, I don't know what she expects me to do, but I'll see what I can do. So I made a quick phone call to Jim Hobson, who's the CEO and president of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And Jim had arranged for a private jet to fly Kent Austin and I into Regina one time when Kent was going to be named the new head coach. So I knew somebody on that board in Regina had a private jet. So I called Jim and I said, Jim, here's the story. You know, John Ryan, as you know, his father's dying with cancer. Would there be any opportunity for your buddy with the jet to fly his family to Green Bay on Sunday? Meanwhile, now I get on a plane. He says, well, we're playing in Edmonton tonight. That particular board member is going to be at the game sitting with me. He said, I'll ask him and we'll see what happens. So I get back to Toronto late Friday night. Saturday morning, I head down to the Sky Dome. The Argos are playing a game at 1 o'clock, and I'm sitting in the Sky Dome press box, and my phone rings. It's John Ryan's mother again, and she says, "Gil, it's wonderful. That jet you arranged, it's all set up." I'm like, really? Unbelievable. So I quickly called Jim Hobson. I said, "Jim, what's up?" He said, "Oh yeah, I was with Paul Hill last night, and his wife's in Hawaii. He's not doing anything this weekend." So he said, "Sure, let's take John and his family to Green Bay and let's go to the game." So now I'm sitting in the Sky Dome press box. It's about halftime. I'm thinking, wait a minute now. I kind of had a little something to do with this. I'd like to be there too. So I rush home, get on the internet, try and book a flight. Can't get into Milwaukee and drive from there in time to get there by noon. Can't get into Green Bay. You know, there's flights to Green Bay through Chicago, but couldn't get there in time to get to the game on time. So I saw a 6 a.m. flight to Chicago. So I flew to Chicago at 6 a.m. Sunday morning. My son-in-law picked me up, who lives in Chicago. I took his car, drove to Green Bay. I walked into the suite just as John Ryan's father was being wheeled into the suite. There's his dad, Bob, right there, who passed away shortly thereafter. That's John. That was John's girlfriend at the time. Sometimes in the NFL those change quickly. This is one of his sisters. This is his other sister and their baby. This is his mother, who's a great lady, and now a widow. And this is his brother-in-law, who's married to his sister here. And does anybody recognize this guy? I don't have a DVD to give you of Team Canada 72, or Paul Henderson. Does anybody recognize who this is? This is John Ryan's brother-in-law, who I've sat with at many NFL games. The name is Andrew Scheer, S-H-E-E-R, and he is, come on Canadians, Speaker of the House of Commons, the youngest Speaker of the House of Commons ever. So there you go. So that's the John Ryan story. And the one thing I'd like to say about that is, when I look back at my life and career, I believe that the Lord allowed that to happen. I don't have a jet or a private plane, but being able to do that for John and his family was more satisfying to me than any commissions I'd ever received from John. You know, there was a guy in the movie Jerry Maguire by the name of Dickie Foxx. He was the old agent that was retiring. Made a couple of cameo appearances with some quotes. And he had this one quote. He said, "This business is a personal relationship business," and it is. Let's talk about the next F, finances. We're trusting in the Lord. We're going to have integrity in business. We're going to have priorities in life, and those are family, finances, and faith. Let's go to finances. You know, one of the things my dad taught me is that you can't outgive the Lord. Dad gave me my first allowance of 10 cents a week, and he told me I should give 5 cents to my Sunday school offering, so I did. When he raised it to 25 cents, I gave 15 cents in my Sunday school offering. You know, 2 Corinthians 9:7 says, "Each one must do just as he has purposed in his heart, not grudgingly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver." I have always tithed, and certainly the Lord has blessed me over the years. I'm thankful for that lesson my father taught me when I first earned an allowance. Luke 6:38 says, "Give, and it will be given unto you." Let's talk about that third F in faith. As I said at the beginning, you don't have to be in full-time Christian service to serve the Lord. You can live out your faith in the marketplace by the way you live a life of integrity and through your witness for the Lord. But beyond that, I found it to be important to be involved in Christian ministries over the years. It's important to serve your fellow man and help the Lord wherever you can. You know, I started with Athletes in Action in Toronto when I met some players. I've been on boards of other Christian ministries over the years, and currently I'm chairman of Equip Leadership Canada. Now let me tell you a little bit more about the ministry of Equip. One day John Maxwell was dreaming out loud, and he said to Equip's president, John Hull, "What would the world be like if we could raise, train, and resource 1 million Christian leaders? What impact would that have on the world?" He then said to John Hull, "John, go figure that out." Well, driven by the Great Commission, Equip Leadership is a nonprofit global leadership development organization founded by John C. Maxwell and committed to radically changing the leadership landscape. Every day we think globally, evaluate our leadership strategy, create resources, and develop associate trainers, donors, and partners for Equip. Equip is committed to train leaders through this process to reach every nation around the world through conferences, biblically centered resources, technology, and partnerships. John Maxwell believes, and I'll say it like John, everything rises and falls on leadership. If you're going to save a nation, you have to change the leadership. When the leaders of Poland were killed in a plane crash, those left behind had John Maxwell come to Poland to teach their new leaders, how do we lead in this crisis? All of the leadership principles we teach are biblically based. Godly principles changing the future of countries. Now, if you watch the Olympics this summer, there was about 205, 206, 208 nations represented in the world. Equip is now in 186 of those nations, and we're pushing to get to them all. Every day, 365 days a year, there is an Equip conference going on somewhere in the world, training leaders. In the last 5 years, Equip has trained over 2 million leaders worldwide, and we're pushing to get to the 5 million Rick spoke of. Now, Sandy Graham and Tony Avalos are here with us today. Please, would you ladies stand? Please visit them tonight at the Equip booth and find out more about how you can get involved with Equip in helping fulfill the Great Commission by training Christian leaders. That's my commercial for Equip. One of the reasons I'm here today is because I represent a football player by the name of Joel Reinders. Now, Joel is with the Cleveland Browns, the New York Giants, Canadian kid from Oakville. And his father, Mike, is in the audience today. Mike, would you stand? That's Joel's father, Mike. Okay. I'm going to tell you an interesting story here. I received an email from Mike some months ago asking me if I could talk to a friend of his, Rick Gosen, who I didn't know. And he had questions about his son, so Mike referred him to me to talk about Rick's son, who's also a football player. When I looked at the initial email from Rick to Mike and saw entrepreneurial leadership, I thought, man, I'd welcome the chance to speak to his son, but I want to know more about Christian entrepreneurial leaders. That was God in that, and that's why I'm here today. As you network with people in the audience today, build bridges with people while you successfully follow your passions in life. Let go and let God lead you in all areas of your life, business and family. Make sure you meet a lot of people here this week. Hopefully you'll come back next year and tell stories of how this worked for you and increased your walk with the Lord. By your presence here today, you're showing your willingness to invest in yourself and your future. You are all entrepreneurial leaders. Now, you wouldn't believe this, but Don Simmons, I discovered, lives about maybe 15 minutes from where I live. And the next part in my speech says, Proverbs 27:17, iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. You know, I'm a bit of an old-school Christian music guy. Like, I don't like seeing the rock bands with the guy with the toque on playing the drums and all that kind of stuff. But Andre Crouch had a profound impact on my life. And I love to sing the words to the song that he wrote, How can I say thanks for the things you have done for me, things so undeserved, yet you gave to prove your love for me. You know, the voices of a million angels could not express my gratitude. All that I am and ever hope to be, I owe it all to thee. To God be the glory, to God be the glory for the things he has done. No two people have the same track in life, but if you follow the Lord's leading, you will be happier and more successful in the things that really matter. There's Dickie Foxx from Jerry Maguire, if anybody remembers that, the old retired agent. The very last scene of the movie in Jerry Maguire. In conclusion, I want to quote what Dickie Foxx said to close the movie Jerry Maguire. He said, hey, I don't have all the answers in life. To be honest, I have failed as much as I've succeeded. But I love my wife, and I love my life, and I wish you my kind of success. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience.